Welcome back to our online lectures of macroeconomics. In this particular lecture, we are going to be reiterating some of the important points we talked about in the corn market, and then we're going to be talking about, instead of market surpluses, market shortages. So real quick, let's go over some of the basic ideas associated with supply and demand before we start talking about shortages in markets. All right, so here we have the corn market, and on the right-hand side, we have quantitatively the data for corn producers, so the sellers in the market. That's your upward sloping supply curve. On the left-hand side, we have quantitatively the information for all buyers, and that's your downward sloping demand curve. So we simply have graphed the data, and this is what we come up with here, is that there's an equilibrium price in this market of $3 per bushel and an equilibrium quantity bought and sold of 7,000 bushels per week. So if buyers and sellers dictate equilibrium, if the market forces of supply and demand, if the invisible hand and competition rules, right, the rationing function of prices, right, buyers trying to maximize utility, sellers trying to maximize profit, we end up at this price quantity relationship of $3 per bushel and 7,000 bushels bought and sold. Well, what happens if the government doesn't allow the price to remain at $3? In this case, we're going to talk about the government instituting what's called a price ceiling. Right, in the previous lecture, when we looked at surpluses, we talked about price floors. In this particular slide, and we're going to be talking about price ceilings, but we're going to drift away. I know everyone will be disappointed. We're not going to be talking about corn anymore. Now we're going to talk about rental units in New York City. So this is the market for 1,000 square foot rental units in New York City, we'll say in Manhattan. Right? So if the government doesn't intervene in this market, if there's no government intervention, right, the price per unit is $3, and let's say that's $3,000, and that's per month. So the price is $3,000 per month, and the number of units rented, in this case not sold, just rented, is 7, and we'll say that's 7 million. Right? That's 7 million rented per month. So there's your equilibrium without any government intervention. But the government feels that it's just too steep for a lot of people on a medium income to really afford $3,000 per month. So the government institutes what's called rent controls. Right? So in this case, the government sets a price ceiling at 2. We'll say that's 2,000, right? $2,000 per month for a rental unit, right? Well, what happens at $2,000 per month? This is going to create or cause a market shortage. And why is that the case? Well, look at the relationship between quantity demanded at $2,000 per unit and quantity supplied at $2,000 per unit. Right? So quantity demanded is obviously going to go up because there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So if the price drops from 3 to 2, from 3,000 to 2,000, quantity demanded increases from 7,000 to 11. Well, you said million, 7 million to 11 million units per month, right? Well, producers are not so happy. On the right-hand side, we say there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, but a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. So when price goes down, quantity supplied goes down, right? So what happens here is that we have a market shortage. At $2 per unit, $2,000 per month, quantity demanded is 11 million and quantity supplied is 4 million. That difference between, right, the excess there, that's what creates the shortage. So if quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied, we have a market shortage. In this case, a market shortage of rental units, right? Well, how does this play out again in the real world? Right? It's not like all of a sudden, these rental units disappear. Well, let's use a simple example. Let's say that, ABC company owned a building with 100 units in it, and let's assume that all 100 units were 1,000 square feet. So they perfectly meet our model here, right? Well, obviously the owner, whether it's a corporation or a single person, ABC company, will stick with them. That they're not going to stop renting. They'd rather have $2,000 per unit than nothing. But what's going to happen over time? Well, two things might happen. The first obvious consequence of government intervening in market is that if the government intervenes, there's going to be less incentive for the owners to keep the building up. So the building could become quite dilapidated. In other words, we could have a situation where things go into disrepair. The heater's not working and lights out and stairs maybe not in the safest of usage. So the first problem is that the owners can let the rental units go in disrepair, right? But here's what typically happens in the real world. Is another idea is that if ABC company owns the building and they're not allowed to charge what they would consider a fair price here at $3,000 per unit, they're thinking of ways that they can make up the money. Well, they could cut off services like, all right, we used to let you, the heat or the electricity may have been free in the rental unit, and no longer is that part of your rent. So they'll make that back up somehow. But another likely consequence is the owners of the building decide, let's not be a rental space anymore. Let's start selling each of these units off as condos, because there's no government law against condos. So if ABC company desires, they can let each of the leases run out, and as the leases run out, instead of renting them out, they sell them off as condos. Now remember, the government's initial intervention in market was an effort to help lower income earners by lowering the price of rental units. But if these units start to be sold off as condos, it's probably going to squeeze those lower to middle income earners out of the market, right? So those people might be left without any rental units at all. So that's how this shortage plays out, right? So last important idea, whether we're talking about the price floor when we looked at the agricultural market or the price ceiling, a very important idea here is that government interventions in markets create secondary economic effects. In the previous slide, we talked about a price floor, and what happened is that they created a market surplus. We could be over allocating resources towards the production of a certain agricultural product. In the real world, all of us end up paying a higher price for food items because of government surpluses, right? And then in this case, with the government shortage, remember the government was trying to make an effort here to help out lower to middle income earners by lowering the price per unit by creating what's called a price ceiling. But the secondary effect was that it actually made lower to middle income earners worse off, because producers, in this case those companies that own the rental units, they decided to package them up and sell them off as condos and not be in the rental unit anymore.